Hi everyone. So we are going to be continuing our lesson on thinking like a historian. So in our last lesson, we talked about the four different historical thinking skills used by historians when we are investigating the past. And we are going to start today's lesson by reviewing those four. So take a moment if you need to, pause this video and review your notes, and I'm going to have you list those four in just a second. Right, so the four ways in which historians think about the past and investigate the past is through contextualization, considering continuity and change, cause and effect, and we compare and contrast, right? And in today's lesson, we are going to take a look at the materials that we use as historians when investigating the past, right? The materials that help us to understand what happened. And we use contextualization, cause and effect, continuity, change, and compare and contrast. We use these when examining and analyzing these materials in order to help us to accurately retell history. So what are these materials that I'm talking about? So as you read and study historical sources, you'll sometimes find that different sources or artifacts tell a different story of what happened. So what are artifacts? Artifacts are objects that have been shaped by humans that are of archaeological, historical, or cultural interest, right? So some examples of these include tools, pottery, metal objects, weapons, and other items like jewelry or death masks. Now, for our purposes, in this class especially, written sources like diaries, documents, letters, um, written interviews, oral histories, photos, newspaper articles, poems, and music, those are all sources as well. They're all artifacts as well, and we will be working with those in this class. So the important thing to keep in mind about sources and artifacts, you can't just believe every single thing that you read. Same thing with everything online. You can't believe every single thing that you read, right? Some things are less reliable than other things. So a source is anything you can get information from that helps you to answer your historical question, right? So, but some sources are clearly better than others. So one example of this is the discovery of the remains in 1996 of an ancient American who scientists named Kennewick Man. And historians, we wanted to use the remains to help us to answer the question, where was Kennewick Man from, right? Where did he originate? And first, an anthropologist looked at the skull and determined that Kennewick Man belonged to a group of ocean hunter-gatherers, most similar to modern Polynesians. And just so you know, anthropologist, that's somebody, it's a scientist who, they study humans, right? Humans of the past mostly, but also humans of the present. And Polynesia is in a region in the southern Pacific Ocean. It's near New Zealand and Australia. Um, so the anthropologist, the person who studies humans, he looked at the skull, looked at its shape, its characteristics, and he determined that it, Kennewick Man must have originated from Polynesia in the southern Pacific Ocean. And this was very controversial because local Native Americans wanted the government to hand over the remains of Kennewick Man so they could bury him according to their traditions, right? Which has deep meaning for many Native Americans. In 2013, what we discover is there are some advances in DNA, right? And these advances in DNA science allowed geneticists. Geneticists are biologists who study genetics, right? The science of genes, how things are passed down from our ancestors, heredity. Um, in 2013, some advances in DNA science by these geneticists um, It allowed us to re-examine the remains of Kennewick Man and test his DNA. And these scientists concluded that based on the DNA evidence, Kennewick Man was actually most closely related to the Colville people, which is a Native American tribe in Northeast Washington, right? Um, and the anthropologist and the geneticist, obviously, we know, can't both be correct. Either Kennewick Man was Native American or and related to that tribe, or he originated in Polynesia. So which one is it? So it's up to historians like us to determine which source is more reliable. And we call this source analysis, right? So in this case, because genetics has proven to be a far more accurate method of determining ancestry. Ancestry is basically what your ethnic origins are, right? Um, your family or ethnic descent. Historians must accept the DNA evidence in this case as the best source. So Kennewick Man was a forefather of local Native Americans. That's what historians must accept. So again, to emphasize what is important to remember about this Kennewick Man, this example, is that the reliability of a source is of crucial importance to historians in order to determine what actually happened in the past, what's true about the past, an interpretation of the past, right? So we're going to watch a video on this in a second.
When we summarize Kennewick Man, for one thing, we'd say he's about 160 pounds. He's 5 feet 7.5 inches. He's about 40 years of age. He's a very sturdy man. He's very strong. He has very robust bones. He's very wide-bodied. He has a much larger, much stronger right arm than left. We link that up to the use of an atlatl. It's a very quick, rapid motion. As you do this, you've got to catch yourself, so you'll throw your left leg forward, and that's going to be the one that'll catch you. And it's amazing, but you can actually see a difference in the strength of the left leg versus the right leg.
But the same weapons, a spear and atlatl, seem to have been used against Kennewick Man.
When you look at his pelvis, his right hip bone has an embedded spear point. It would have just knocked him down hard. It sliced into the right pelvic bone. It sheared off part of the pelvic crest. But as far as being a lucky shot, it really was, because if it had gone just a little bit more in, it would have gone into the internal organs. Certainly would have killed him.
He also had 5 broken ribs. He may have got them at the same time as the spear.
The type of injury that you see in the ribs, it's the kind of thing that I see in my forensic case identification when somebody kicks somebody. Whoever the assailant was could have been close enough to him to actually be able to give him a good stomp and then break these ribs. But he was just tough as nails and survived. He was able to get away, and he lived a good 20 years after this happened.
Right, so this video, you can see the importance of artifacts, right? Even human remains themselves can act as artifacts and allow historians to tell a story and use those materials in order to do that, right? So next, we're going to move on. We're going to, in this course, most of the sources that you'll be asked to analyze are going to be written, or like I said, they're going to be like photo sources. And we call these documentary evidence, right? And there are different types of documentary evidence. We have primary sources as well as secondary sources. So a primary source, as you may know, they are original documents. They are usually written by an eyewitness to a person, place, or event. And some examples of these include autobiographies, original documents, or like direct copies of documents, photographs, audio or video recordings, eyewitness testimony. And these sources, they tend to be the most reliable of sources. The next type of source is a secondary source, right? And secondary sources, they're sources that were produced later by someone who did not personally participate in or witness the person, place, or event in question. And they tend to be less reliable than primary sources. Some examples of these would be journal articles that are written by researchers or professors, reports, even reports that students do, right? Encyclopedias, sometimes magazines, documentaries, dictionaries, and more. Those are secondary sources. And these can, of course, be reliable. They simply tend to not be as reliable as primary sources in general. So that's something to keep in mind. So for our closing activity, what I'm going to have you do, I'm going to explain it, and then you're going to do it on the Edpuzzle. So we're doing an exit ticket activity, and what I'm going to have you do before we finish is I want you to write down one tip that you would give another student who might be struggling to understand what we learned about sources today, right, from this lesson. So use at least 9 words in your response and use complete sentences. And again, write down a tip that you would give another student who might not understand sources, the different types of sources that we talked about, or the importance of them. What would be your tip? So thank you so much, and good luck.